My guest is Rowena McGowan from the Museum of Healthcare. I love your museum.
Thank you so much. I also love my museum.
And thank you so much for coming in to show us some of the artifacts from your museum. This is, these are fascinating.
Oh,
and
well.
I'm not even sure where to start.
Well, thank you. I always say that the special thing about museums is that they have the objects and the objects make it real. So I pulled just a few objects from our collection. We have many more than this. I will say quickly, you will see me handling these without gloves, and that's because they're mostly from our education collection. As well as the bottles, it's good practice just so you don't drop them to get a bit of a better grip on them. So mostly we do wear gloves for my museum people who are sort of frowning at me right now. So I've got a couple of different types of objects here. So these are actually medication bottles from about the late 19th century. And I really like these because they really demonstrate sort of identification of potential danger. When we think of a pharmaceutical bottle today, you know, it's typically this white plastic, rounded, pretty standardized.
With a cap that you can't get off.
With a cap, yes, the childproof caps.
Right, yeah.
These are a lot easier to get into. But these are actually designed in order to warn that the contents are potentially dangerous.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways that they show that you should be careful with this bottle. So first of all, the color. Warning coloration, green and blue. I did actually read a paper once that suggested that the blue was also promoted as a way to protect the medicines from light. This is a time period when medicines are not going to tend to be as stable as they are today, but the paper also suggested it didn't work that well, so I'm not sure. And then the design of the bottles, the way they're shaped. So for example, this one you can see has the ribbing on it. So yeah, absolutely.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So it has the raised lettering and the ribbing.
Oh, it feels, it feels quite a bit different.
It feels very different. Yeah. So it says, this one says not to be taken. This one says poison. So if you can read, you can touch it and be warned. But even if you can't, if you touch the ribbing, you know, you're completely illiterate. It's pitch dark. You put your hand on this and you know you need to be careful. This one has little crosses. So same thing. Even if you can't even see this bottle, you can touch it and you know you have to be careful. And finally, this is my absolute favorite feature, is the shape of this bottle itself actually warns you that it's potentially dangerous, because if you turn it around, it's a coffin.
No. Oh, that is so clever.
Yeah, every time I show this to someone, including like pharmacists and that kind of thing, they always say, oh, this is such a great idea. I wish we still did this. So it's a really interesting example of sort of design for purpose.
That is so clever.
And they're very neat. Yeah,
it's really neat. Yeah.
I also, yes. So I have these sputum cups and flasks, which are another great example of sort of designing for a specific purpose. So these are going to be like very late 19th century to early 20th century, to shading into mid 20th century. And these are specifically for people with tuberculosis. This is a time period when we have germ theory. We know that disease is caused by germs. We know specifically that tuberculosis is caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis. And we're trying to figure out, tuberculosis, it was a huge problem back then. It is still a huge issue today. So we were really trying to figure out how to prevent the spread of tuberculosis now that we understand that it is contagious. And one of the ways that they were trying to do this was to stop people from spitting. At this time period, it was specifically believed that if you spit and the spit dried and blew around, if someone else inhaled it, that would be how they would catch tuberculosis. So you really want to stop people from spitting. And so you would spit into this instead. Typically, this would be filled with something like carbolic acid, maybe even water, and you would certainly wash it out with water or boiling water or carbolic acid. This particular one, you can see it has the little envelope.
Yeah.
So you would spit into this, and then you could close it up so you wouldn't be spreading your germs around, and then you would just take this insert out and you would burn it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And now, was it kind of, you said something about it being a status symbol to have tuberculosis, like.
Oh, that was,
yeah.
So in sort of this is more of a 18th, earlier 19th century thing. Right. But there was a certain romanticizing of tuberculosis. So you see a lot of sort of, and you see this in books like Jane Eyre is a great example. You have the consumptive maiden. who is this usually young girl who is simply too pure and too good for the world, so she dies of tuberculosis. Or you have the consumptive poet. Keats is probably the most famous example, but Edgar Allan Poe, for example, actually complains at one point that in order for a poet to be famous, he has to die of consumption.
Good grief.
So yeah, there's this, and it's certainly been suggested that a lot of this romanticization was sort of a trauma response to how common tuberculosis was. But by the time we get to these flasks, this is gone. We're not really, you still see it popping up sometimes in our culture even today. Movies like Moulin Rouge talk about sort of the consumptive maiden. I hear it's a plot point in the video game Red Dead Redemption 2, I think. I haven't played it. But this is a time period when we know that tuberculosis is contagious and therefore it can be passed from person to person. And because of that, if you use one of these, it's almost holding up a neon sign to say, hey, I'm dangerous, I'm contagious. So there was actually often a social cost to using these. And we know that because of the way some of them were designed and some of the contemporary records about them.
Well, what strikes me, though, is with both of those, this is not what a poor person would go out and buy. These must have been expensive. And when you're living in kind of a hard scrabble life, you're kind of feeding your kids and so on, you probably wouldn't buy something that elaborate like that. They look, that's the word I'm looking for, rich somehow. They seem to have like the sort of thing I can't imagine a poor person taking out of their pocket and using it.
They were certainly very heavily promoted.
Were they?
As a form of sort of prevention of tuberculosis. So, I mean, also you would see sort of different designs, different styles. So there would be sort of a range of these kinds of things available.
Right.
And as I said, like they were very, very heavily promoted by medical professionals. You should really use these. These are a safety device. But people didn't want to because there was a social cost, which we can see in the design. So this particular one, it looks like a cigarette case.
It does. That's what I thought it was at first, yeah.
So if you have this in your pocket or in your purse, it's not necessarily going to look like it's a sputum flask. And this is one of my favorites because there's a contemporary record, I think it's from about 1902, I want to say. It might be a tiny bit later, that actually demonstrates how to wrap this in a handkerchief. And so you can hide it. You can conceal it. It looks like you're just sort of coughing into your handkerchief, but actually you're using one of these. Wow. And we even see, we unfortunately don't have one in our collection, but some of these actually have little holes on the side so you can sew them into a handkerchief.
Oh boy. Wow.
So yeah, we see this real tension around the time period between this idea of sort of prevention of tuberculosis, but also people having this cost to actually using these devices. So they're very, very neat.
I'm trying to think of anything that's going on today that would be the equivalent of you trying to desperately hide. HIV is the only thing that comes to mind, how you would desperately try to hide the fact that you've got that. And that it's the only thing I can think of that where you'd go to great lengths to hide it.
Yeah, I sort of sometimes think of COVID-19 sort of after masking mandates in the sense that often you are masking because you are ill, you know, when you're not required to mask. So I sort of correlate those with those. That's sometimes how I teach about that, of that idea of, you know, if you mask, are you sending a message that you are sick?
I can remember at the height of COVID, we didn't know how it was being spread and all this. If you sneezed or coughed, it was like the parting of the Red Sea. People just got out of your way and looked at you horrified, and you're trying to explain, dust, there's a dust up my nose, right?
Yeah. I remember doing a workshop about one of the pieces of advice early COVID was to inform your colleagues when there were things going on with you that might look like disease symptoms. I remember going in once because I'd just gotten my bike out for the first time. I'd over-exercised. It was way too cold, and I had damaged my lungs a little bit, and I was coughing all day, and had to kind of send a little email around to say, it's okay, everyone, I'm not contagious.
Fine. But nothing to do with, right? And this last one, now this is interesting. Yeah, if you're a little squeamish, you may want to look away.
Yes, so this is a bloodletting tool. I will demonstrate it for you, but of course not on you or on me.
I was going to say, no, you're not.
So this is called a scarificator. This is developed in the early 1700s, but it's becoming much more popular in the latter part of the 1700s. And this is a bloodletting tool, which is a very common form of medical treatment at the time. So the basic idea of this is it's a box full of blades. So you bring the blades out, and then you're going to press it on the body part that you would like to take blood from.
Oh, my
that
goodness.
fast.
My goodness, you wouldn't know what happened.
Yes.
Wow.
So these really tend to freak people out today when I show them, but it's really important
yeah.
to remember that for the time period, this is a humane device. This is
Right.
considered relatively gentle. At the time, the other things that you would be bloodletting with are certainly leeches. You'd be using leeches. That's a great way to do it. But also a lot of blades, things like lancets, that kind of thing. And because this can make multiple cuts at once, and because it's very, very fast, it's considered very humane. And it is said, I have not tried this myself for obvious reasons, but it is said that in the hands of a good doctor, this could be used on a sleeping infant without waking them up.
Hey, yeah, a good selling point. But
That was
holy
what was
cow.
said at the time. But
Right. This is so interesting, and I know your museum is expect to spend a couple of hours there because it does take that long to get through the whole thing. And if people want to know more, they can go to your website.
absolutely, our website, our social media, we promote all of our events. So we just had our Teddy Bear Hospital, which is always kind of an iconic event.
Right.
Our next big event we'll be having some Easter programming. We do a lot of outreach during the summer, and if you really loved hearing me talk, I'm doing a talk at the Great Lakes Museum next week on the ways that boats and disease meet and intertwine.
Super. Thank you so much for bringing these in. This has been really interesting. Thank
Oh,
you.
it was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.